Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Today we're going to explore the time that Princess Margaret made a 3-week tour of the United States with her husband, Lord Snowdon. The year was 1965, and relations between England and the United States were not the best. According to biography.com, the United Kingdom had an £800 million deficit on payments in 1964. And in order to get a loan from the International Monetary Fund, the U.S. had to approve it. In addition to the weakening power of the UK, which was also going through decolonization, the nation didn't support the United States' involvement in the Vietnam War, and many attribute this as the personal tensions between the nation's then leaders, Prime Minister Harold Wilson and President Lyndon B. Johnson. In fact, Johnson is the only U.S. president out of 11 to not meet Queen Elizabeth. At first, the visit was because of a former U.S. ambassador in London, but then it developed into a visit which consisted mainly of official and public engagements undertaken at specific request of Her Majesty's government. So let's find out where they went and how everyone felt about their visit. The West Coast comes first. The trip that Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, her husband, made in 1965 caused talk on both England and American sides, mainly because of how expensive travel was at that time, and some of the MPs in England thought that it was a holiday they were taking, but they were there for official visits. Princess Margaret was 35 at the time. The first stop was in San Francisco, and that took place on November the 4th, 1965. According to biography.com, she and her husband arrived with a 16-person entourage and 75 pieces of luggage. And at first, setting foot in San Francisco, staying on the 11th and 12th floors of the Huntington Hotel in the Nob Hill area, and then the group made visits all around the Bay Area, including the San Francisco City Hall, a fashion show at the Hilton Hotel, the University of California, Berkeley campus, a mass at Grace Cathedral, the Monterey Peninsula, and of course, they played tourists too at the Coit Tower and on a cable car. Princess Margaret had told the San Francisco Chronicle at first she thought she might be disappointed hearing so much about San Francisco, but it lived up to her expectations. Princess Margaret spent 3 days exploring the San Francisco and the Bay Area with her husband, Anthony Jones, Earl of Snowdon, and Margaret was met by several hundred San Franciscans and Mayor John F. Shelley and his wife, who offered up roses and attempted a small curtsy. And Margaret greeted the crowds, and then she stepped up to the microphone and spoke. That wasn't in the scheduled plans. And she said, "It is particularly wonderful to be here in San Francisco. I've heard of this city for so long, and I'm thrilled to be here." And from there, she and Lord Snowdon were driven to the San Francisco Press Club for dinner. And she turned down the offer of a formal reception line and instead delighted the crowd by moving naturally through the room, speaking to guests by turn. The Chronicle reported that she drank scotch and smoked American cigarettes through a holder. And Princess Margaret was excited to meet Carol Channing, who was there. Carol at that time had great success with her role in Hello, Dolly. And Princess Margaret said, "How absolutely lovely to meet you. We have your records, and they're marvelous." After dinner, Princess Margaret was supposed to be on a schedule, but after her visit to City Hall that morning, she winged it after that. She was told by her security people that her and her husband couldn't ride the trolley cars, but later she did. Dressed in a silver and white brocade dress, she settled onto the floor of a cable car for a 35-minute ride through Chinatown and up Telegraph Hill, and Lord Snowdon hung on to the outside. According to the sfgate.com, they attended a private party at the Hillsborough home of Charles Thoreau, longtime publisher of the San Francisco Chronicle. In attendance, much to the royals' delight, was Bing Crosby, who just happened to live in the neighborhood with his family. Bing said, "She's very knowledgeable about music of every kind. She wanted to know what I thought of some of the newer singers like Jack Jones and Andy Williams. She's a very bright, attractive young lady with a good sense of humor." The next day, Princess Margaret and her husband took a hovercraft journey across the bay, and then they toured the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And then, after that, they boarded a flight to Los Angeles. So this is the Los Angeles trip. It would seem that Princess Margaret would be in her element with the Hollywood scene, but when they got to Los Angeles, it was there that Princess Margaret got into trouble with her attitude, and maybe she was drinking a little too much. But Princess Margaret offended the old Hollywood elite at a dinner reportedly organized by her friend Sharman Douglas, who was a socialite and the daughter of a former U.S. ambassador. At the dinner, she managed to offend Judy Garland, Grace Kelly, and Elizabeth and Richard Burton. The first to be insulted was Judy Garland. Once Princess Margaret arrived, she reportedly ordered the Wizard of Oz star Garland to perform. The Telegraph reports in that response. Garland told a royal aide, "Tell her I'll sing if she christens the ship first," and that the nasty, rude little princess should make the request directly. And then Princess Margaret met Grace Kelly, and Margaret said to her, "You don't look like a movie star." So that stunned Grace Kelly, to which she responded, "Well, I wasn't born a movie star." Princess Grace would flush with anger when she retold the story over the years. And Princess Margaret didn't really offend Elizabeth and Richard Burton. It was just when they arrived early to the party, they didn't like the seating arrangements they had. They thought that they should be sitting next to Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon, because everywhere the Burtons went, they were the most important people in the room. And this time, they weren't the most important people in the room, so they left. Okay, this incident didn't happen when Princess Margaret went to America, but I thought it was a neat story. According to Furious Love, Elizabeth Taylor and Richard Burton, written by the biographers Sam Kashner and Nancy Schoenberger, this wasn't the last time Princess Margaret would offend Taylor. A couple of years later, in 1967, the star and her on-again, off-again husband invited Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon and a tight-knit group of 150 relatives and friends to the London premiere of The Taming of the Shrew, which they co-starred in. Taylor famously had a jewelry collection that could rival the royal family's, including a 33.19 carat croup diamond ring. Noticing the bling, Princess Margaret reportedly asked, "Is that the famous diamond? It's so large. How very vulgar." Unfazed by the royals' rudeness, Cleopatra star allegedly responded, "Yes, ain't it great?" Seemingly, the princess then, in a total U-turn, asked if the actor would mind if she tried it on. And then Taylor allegedly retorted, "Not so vulgar now, is it?" So then there was the trip to Arizona. Princess Margaret and Lord Snowdon then hopped to a plane to Arizona, where they spent 4 days. They visited a friend whose father, Lewis W. Douglas, was the former ambassador to the court of St. James. Then they spent time enjoying themselves at Esonoida Ranch. On November the 15th, they made it to Washington, D.C. According to Town and Country magazine, on their first night, the Snowdons had a private meal at the British Embassy, where they stayed for the duration of their visit. The following day, the couple toured several of the capital's highlights, such as Mount Vernon, the Jefferson Memorial, and the National Cathedral. They also stopped at Arlington Cemetery and laid a wreath at President Kennedy's grave. And that evening, the royal couple attended a reception at the British Embassy and were later entertained by the Attorney General at his home. On November 17th at 8 p.m., a black-tie dinner was held in the couple's honor in the stateroom of the White House. The evening was technically an official dinner. 150 guests were in attendance, including notable and political and cultural figures of the time. Kirk Douglas sat at President Johnson and Princess Margaret's table, while Nelson Rockefeller, then governor of New York, sat with Lady Bird Johnson and Lord Snowdon. Supreme Court Justice Abe Fortas, Defense Secretary Robert McNamara, and Vice President Hubert Humphrey also were present. After dinner, President Johnson delivered a toast thanking Margaret and Snowdon for their friendship and praising the special relationship between Britain and the United States. He also quoted Mark Twain's line. During her toast, Princess Margaret congratulated the President and First Lady on their 31st wedding anniversary. The couple wed on November 17, 1934, in San Antonio, Texas. Margaret also noticed the hospitality and kindness that she and Lord Snowdon received across the U.S., saying the experience touched us greatly, and it will make us take home superlatively happy memories of all we have done and seen. After dinner, Vogue.com stated that the party moved to the East Room and things began to pick up. The President and the Princess danced to Everything's Coming Up Roses, and meanwhile Lord Snowdon grooved to rock and roll numbers with enormous gusto and expertise throughout the evening. As a reporter for the New York Times observed at the time, there was laughter and chatting, and Margaret smoked a cigarette on a long holder and everyone looked totally at ease. So Margaret and Snowdon departed for England the next day after an exhausting 14-day trip. So in the 1970s, there was an attempt for a revisit. The visit was deemed successful, but Lord Cromer didn't want a repeat performance. Lord Cromer, the British ambassador to America, did not want the princess in the country because he felt it would create more harmful publicity for the royal family. The report claims that his reservations were passed on to Buckingham Palace in 1973 when Lieutenant Colonel Frederick Burnaby Atkins, the princess's private secretary, was deciding on a venue for the royal tour. Princess Margaret did not visit the U.S. in 1973. Instead, she toured Barbados and Germany. She did, however, make later official visits to the U.S. So it sounds like Princess Margaret did her duty. She went on a whirlwind trip to America, seeing the West Coast, then traveling to Washington to represent her country. She met President Johnson and his wife. Queen Elizabeth had invited President Johnson, but the Vietnam War was going on and he couldn't find the time, it was speculated. And then Princess Margaret helped to keep the bond between the U.S. and England with her visit to Washington, D.C. After their speeches, President Johnson danced with Princess Margaret to the song "Everything's Coming Up Roses." Princess Margaret, even with her unconventional ways at times, served the Queen well by playing an active role in the royal family's public work. She had an interest in the field of welfare and the arts, and she was also patron or president of over 80 organizations, and she would have made her family proud, and I'm sure Queen Elizabeth appreciated all she did to help her and the royal family carry out their duties. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, if you could give it a thumbs up, it would be greatly appreciated. If you haven't clicked on the notification bell, if you do so, it will let you know when new videos are available to view. And I wish everybody a great day today, and tune in again soon to another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. Thank you. Bye.